But for now, what I want to deal with is this concept of Adam and how the Bible presents Adam. In the Bible, if we just look at what the text says, everywhere Adam is mentioned, he's always mentioned as a real person. There's never a sense in the scripture that Adam is some sort of a fictional literary device. It's not a fairy tale story, Adam. It doesn't read like the myths of the ancient world. For example, in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, Adam is a normal person. He talks to God. God is talking to him. Adam and Eve talk to each other. In Genesis 5, Adam has a son. In 1 Chronicles chapter 1, 1 Chronicles has 9 chapters of names. This person begat that person, begat that person. Well, Adam is just one more name in the list. He starts it, has a son, who has a son, who has a son. And many of the people in that list, we know them as historic characters. Romans chapter 5 mentions Adam in the same breath as Jesus Christ, in the same sentence as Jesus Christ. In 1 Corinthians 15:45 says, quote, the first man Adam, and calls Jesus the last Adam. So everywhere Adam is mentioned, he's mentioned as a real person. So he's never presented in the text as a fictional literary device.
And Glenn, the main reason why you're bringing that out is because the Hebrew word Adam means mankind. And what has happened through history is we had the critics that come in and they want to change this and say, oh, it's not really a real person. It was mankind that God is talking about in the creation. That's really what you're addressing here, is that while the word itself means mankind, it's also the name of a specific person, the first being that was created by God.
Part of the issue comes about when we try to look at Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and then we look at current views of science and try to reconcile those. And we come up with different, or at least people have come up with different theories of, well, maybe Genesis is some sort of a myth or a combination of a myth and history. There's no literary clues anywhere in the scriptures that says that Adam is anything other than a regular human being, a regular man. And the place that it really drives home is, and usually when I teach Genesis 1, 2, and 3, I don't ever start with Genesis 1, 2, and 3. I start with Romans chapter 5, because Romans chapter 5 is Paul's explanation of no less than the gospel. If you want to know what the gospel is, the gospel of Jesus Christ, well, just read Romans chapter 5, starting at verse 12 and going through verse 21. He explains the gospel. In there, he says, Adam was the first man. Sin entered through Adam, and death entered the world through that sin. And so through Adam's sin, we all sinned and we all died, which means we were separated from God. And because of that separation, the only way to get back right with God again is through Jesus Christ. That's what's explained in Romans chapter 5. Well, in Romans chapter 5, in the same sentences, Adam is mentioned with Jesus Christ. Matter of fact, in Romans 5:12, talks about Adam. Romans 5:14, Adam is, quote, a type of him who was to come, which is Jesus Christ. So in verse 15 in Romans 5 compares Adam's sin with Jesus' salvation. So we have Adam and Jesus mentioned more than once in the same sentence. And if we were to hold, as some liberal theologians do, that Adam is a figurative literary device, is Jesus a figurative literary device? If we have Jesus as a figurative literary device, we've just lost our entire salvation. That's why it's important, is because grammatically, in Romans 5 and in Corinthians and other places in the New Testament that's talking about no less than the gospel, Adam and Jesus are mentioned in the same sentence as both being human beings. And the event that started with Adam was reconciled by the event of Jesus, namely death on the cross and resurrection. And so grammatically, in the New Testament, in Romans and Corinthians and other places like that, no room here for literary myths and figurative allegories at all. So theologically, we're in very, very deep yogurt if we make Adam a figurative literary device. That's why Adam's important. And that's why we have to spend so much energy. Matter of fact, Steve, there's probably been more books written and more lectures given about the first 3 chapters of Genesis than there has been on just about anything else in Scripture. And so that's why it's important. The New Testament explanations of salvation have their beginnings way back here in Genesis. We have other clues in Genesis that tell us that it's just not written as a myth. For example, in Genesis chapter 2, verses 10 to 14, there's a passage in here that talks about the rivers that are near Eden. And we'll deal with that when we get to Genesis 2. But just to give a summary, in Genesis 2 talks about these rivers that are the boundaries to Eden. It tells us the names of the rivers. It tells us how many rivers there are. It tells us what direction they flow. It tells us what lands border the rivers. It tells us what type of stones and minerals there are. It tells us the quality of the stones and minerals there are. So passages like that are communicating facts and data.